All right, so today is the final lesson on cellular energy in our Unit 2 of metabolic processes. So in the previous 3 lessons of this unit, we talked about energy transformations and how they relate to metabolic processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, these metabolic pathways, each one of them has processes that change energy to more usable forms. And we have looked at these in great details. And overall, we should have a basic understanding now of how both in plants and in animals, what are the processes that can either create or capture those organic molecules that store energy. Now, knowing this, we can also examine now some of the wider implication of people's attempts to control these processes. And there's definitely some benefits and some drawbacks in trying to control these processes. So the topic that we're going to talk about today has a lot to do with these metabolic processes. We're going to talk about some obesity and weight control diets. And these obesity and weight control plans have become a major issue in our North American society today. Proper nutrition is very important to good health and healthy weight management. And there's so many diets and weight control supplements that can actually do more harm than good in helping people manage their weight. Some weight control drugs that were approved previously for use have been now shown to be actually dangerous and sometimes even deadly. There's advertisements going on all the time for diet pills and miracle diets, and these are really everywhere, and they claim to give miraculous results, but ultimately this creates quite a lot of confusion. But with a little bit of knowledge of metabolism, that will help people to sort their way through these kinds of information. So another part of trying to control these energy processes, that's one aspect of it, is in weight management and health and nutrition. But the other aspect of it is how scientists have turned to using some plants and microbes, and those are bacteria, and trying to use those metabolic processes that come with those plants and those bacteria to actually try to help and improve the conditions of the environment. Some of these organisms can either absorb or metabolize toxic waste material. And if they're used properly, studies have shown that they can actually help to clean up oil spills or remove toxins from water and from the environment. And this is another area that we're going to be looking at today in this lesson, because this has opened up a whole new area of research called bioremediation. So in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about, looking at how to analyze the role of these metabolic processes in the functioning of and the interactions between biotic and abiotic systems, and the use of these microbes and bioremediation. And then we are also going to assess what's the relevance to one's personal life and to our community, using our understanding of that we have of cell biology and some of the related technologies with regards to metabolic processes and how they are relevant to personal choices about our diet, exercise, and our use of pharmacological substances. So as we are talking today, some of the things that you can think about the implications of what are the implications of trying to actually affect and alter your body's metabolism. Do fad diets, in fact, work? What is a healthy way to lose weight? Should people use diet pills, and are they considered safe? And in terms of our bioremediation section, how can plants and other organisms be used to actually improve the condition of our environment? So one second. Okay. So first, let's talk about nutrition and cellular energy. So most people, you're like yourself, probably are aware that you need to have a balanced diet, and that's very important for good health. But not too many people actually understand the role that these various nutrients play on a cellular level in our body. And as we've learned earlier, for example, glucose is a carbohydrate. It's the main fuel source for our generating of ATP. But if you have excess carbohydrates, those can be stored either in a short-term way as glycogen in our muscles and liver cells, or they can be used sort of more longer term and turned into fat. But when the body requires that additional energy, that glycogen that's stored for short-term use in your muscles and liver can become quickly converted back into glucose and enter our cellular respiration pathway. And as you probably already know, good sources of carbohydrates include pastas and rices and whole grains and bread. And the more complex carbohydrates are typically recommended over the simpler ones because complex carbohydrates tend to have more complex molecular structure that takes longer for our body to break down. So this allows for us to have that feeling of fullness longer without needing us to actually go back and eat more. These complex carbohydrates, in addition to their carbohydrate content, also contain more vitamins and more dietary fiber, which are typically missing from the more refined carbohydrates, such as sugar or white rice or white bread. Fats have also been often aligned with being bad for our health. And it's not that fats themselves are unhealthy, but actually it's the amount of fatty foods that you ingest, and typically is ingested in the North American lifestyle and North American diet. Hi, Hanya. So these fats, which are also known as lipids, these can be used to generate ATP when our carbohydrates aren't immediately available. And when fats become digested, fats are broken down into their component molecules of glycerol and fatty acids. Glycerol in the pathway gets converted into PGAL and enters that cellular respiration path in glycolysis. And fatty acids are stored as fat or converted into two carbon fragments that form acetyl-CoA, which can then enter Krebs cycle. So dietary sources of this molecule, this fat molecule, these lipids and fats are sources such as the fat found in dairy and butter, cream, margarine is another source that you can get from plants, and the various oils. Fats are also found in meats and also in nuts. And typically plant oils are ones that are recommended over animal fats as being the healthier option. So it's the other source for getting our energy and our ATP, which is not actually our body's typical first choice, but proteins can also be broken down and used to create ATP. Those various amino acids that are found in proteins can be converted into different substances that can enter cellular respiration pathway at several different points. And this important macromolecule, the protein, is found in things such as red meat or poultry, seafood, eggs, milk products too, but also in plants, certainly in beans and nuts. Those are all good sources of protein. And also cereals and pasta also contain a small amounts of protein. As you can imagine, all of these grains are ultimately cells, and cells have machinery and enzymes that do their work, and all of those are made up of proteins. So at some minor amount, these cereals and pastas also contain protein. Now, the percentage daily recommendations in our diet are that we should be getting typically 60 to 65% of our daily energy from carbohydrates, preferentially complex carbohydrates and not so much the refined ones. 30 to 35% of it, 30 to 35% of our energy should be coming from fats or lipids, preferably the healthier plant fats that are typically found from sources such as olive oil and avocado oil. And then the rest of it should be coming from protein. So actually, surprisingly, we only need a very small amount of protein to meet our daily requirements. Now, Canada's food guide for adults recommends having 7 to 10 servings of vegetables and fruit. And many of you are familiar with Canada's food guide. I'm sure you've come across it before. So 7 to 10 servings of fruit and vegetables, 6 to 8 servings of grain products, a couple of servings of milk and alternatives, and about 2 to 3 servings of meats and alternatives. So this is an amount that will allow our body to meet its need for vitamins and minerals and all the other nutrients that will contribute to good health. Following this type of a food guide will also help to reduce our risk of obesity, developing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and also certain types of cancer and osteoporosis. Now, before we move on to really talk about some fad diets, are there any questions so far? Okay, so let's talk about fad diets now. Now, I think all the experts in the scientific community and in the nutrition community certainly agree that really the best and most reliable way of managing your weight and losing your weight is to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And if you don't have one, is to actually change one's lifestyle habits. That's really the best way to lose weight and to keep that weight off. This means cutting typically about 500 calories a day and beginning an exercise program. And in many cases, cutting the excess calories means readjusting our servings and selections to become a more closely matched to those recommended in the food guides, the ones that we just talked about and covered. And doing this will typically allow that extra weight to come off very gradually. But at the same time, we are constantly being tempted by ads that we might see on TV or in magazines or on social media that promise us to lose 30 pounds in 30 days or lose weight while you sleep and such things. And then there's those skinny celebrities who quite irresponsibly swear by some fad diet or another. So many of these diets, these fad diets, actually don't follow these healthy guidelines, but rather so severely reduce or sometimes even completely eliminate one of the food groups. And this can lead to somebody to lose weight in the short term, but this can be quite unhealthy from a metabolic standpoint. So let's talk about a couple of the fad diets. So the first one is that low fat or no fat diet. So in this type of diet, people will severely limit the fats that they eat, and the fats then gets replaced by, obviously, eating more carbohydrates. The idea is that if you're not eating fats, then your body won't make fats. And as we know, this is completely, absolutely untrue, because glucose can be converted into other molecules such as glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which can then be converted into glycerol, which is a part of the lipid molecule. And it can also be converted into pyruvate, and the pyruvate can be converted into acetyl-CoA, and acetyl-CoA into fatty acids, which is the other part of lipid molecules. So really, you have all the resources present to create fat. Any excess energy, no matter what nutrient molecule it originally came from, however way you obtained it, if it's excess amount in excess of what you need, that will get stored as fat. So with this type of diet, not only your fat will continue to be created, but the individual's sugar levels will be on the rise because of all the extra carbohydrates that are consumed. So that is essentially the gist of the problem with following a low fat or no fat diet. Now let's take a look at the low carb, high protein diet. What's the problem with this? So this diet goes by different names, and it's often known by author's name of whatever is the latest diet craze book. But no matter whatever it's called, the basic idea is that when you're dieting, you get to eat an unlimited amount of protein, meat, fish, poultry, cheese, eggs, with no carbohydrates, or very little or pretty much no carbohydrates. And this would mean eliminating sweets, of course, but also rice, pasta, bread, fruit, milk, even many vegetables are discouraged. So this will result, obviously, in an immediate weight loss right away, but most of the weight is lost in terms of water. And when the person goes back to eating a normal diet and including some carbohydrates, that water weight is regained. And if that individual stays on the diet, on the low carb, high protein diet for a long time, eventually muscle weight will be lost, and also fat will be lost. But the problem is that you actually also end up losing muscle weight. And health-wise, there's many problems with this diet. This is not an adequate diet, and because it's not addressing all the food groups. So this will tend to worsen any chronic or acute conditions that you have, and actually make it harder for your body to recover from any illnesses that you may encounter. So the problem is that the high amount of proteins and fats can lead to an increase of heart disease, to incidences of cancer, kidney disease, and then your lack of carbohydrates depletes your muscles of all the stored glycogen and can weaken you and making exercising very, very difficult. It can also lead to conditions such as nausea, such as diarrhea, because you're excluding carbohydrates, which add quite a bit of bulk to your digestive system. You can also, in addition to diarrhea, you might develop the opposite. You might develop constipation, and you are going to be also quite fatigued. So the other issue is that a great deal of calcium is lost in this type of diet, because when your protein levels are high because you're eating lots of protein, but your calcium intake is low because of your dietary restrictions. You're not eating the right vegetables, you're not consuming the right amount of milk or dairy that typically comes with carbohydrates and calcium. But the most dangerous problem with this type of diet is ketosis. And this is a process where you get ketones, and acetone is one of them. And these ketones will actually start to build up in your blood because of the incomplete breakdown of your stored fats. And this will cause a bad breath. Typically, let me just correct this, bad breath. Yeah, it's known as ketone breath. A lot of people who are on this type of diet often will have that sort of a breath, and causes the pH of your blood to become more acidic, certainly start to go outside of its normal range. And if the pH of the blood becomes altered too much and becomes too acidic, then your proteins and enzymes will stop working properly. And this can actually make you quite sick and even can lead to death. So there's definitely problems with both of these types of diets. So the best thing really to do, the final message is generally follow Canada's food guide, keep in mind serving sizes, portions, be active, exercise, and keep in mind that if you're taking in certainly more nutrients than you need, you will be storing them as fat regardless of where they come from. So it's better to follow this food plan, but reduce your portions and remain active. That is a change in lifestyle, and that's something that needs to happen gradually in order for someone to be able to sustain that. So gradually, somebody needs to change their lifestyle. Any comments or questions about that so far? Okay, let's talk about diet pills and diet medications. So there are weight-reducing medications, and these are typically divided into two categories, two main categories of prescription drugs or the ones that you can get over the counter. Now, the later group, those over-the-counter drugs, tend to generally have smaller amounts of the active substance that supposedly makes them safer and be able to be offered over the counter. But there is also many natural or homeopathic products that do contain key ingredients that studies suggest may have an effect on appetite. But regardless of what type, weight loss drugs typically have one of three mechanisms of action. So either they suppress appetite, or they increase a body's metabolism, or they interfere with the body's ability to absorb some specific nutrients. So the ones that reduce appetite, these reduce that desire to eat and tend to contain amphetamine-like substances. And the side effect of these amphetamine-like substances is that they tend to increase your blood pressure and cause dry mouth, constipation, headaches, and insomnia. An example of these is something called sibutramine, or Reductil is another one of these example of these types of drugs. The second category is the type that acts by increasing the body's metabolism. And these drugs tend to increase the rate of the metabolism by stimulating the central nervous system. So these stimulants, as a result of their action on the central nervous system, can be very addictive, can be very habit forming. Then thirdly, there's the ones that will interfere with the body's ability to absorb specific nutrients from food. And these drugs, such as orlistat, is one example, they will block the breakdown of fats and prevent the absorption of fats at the intestines. Now, as you can imagine, the intestines have not evolved and are not designed through evolution to include, to contain a lot of oily, fatty substances. That's why typically these oils and fats are broken down in the intestines and absorbed. So having a problem with breaking down fat absorption can cause side effects such as having an oily bowel movement, and this can come often with stomach pain and flatulence, and none of these are very pleasant side effects that anybody wants to endure. So these weight loss medications fall typically into these categories. But weight loss medications have actually endured quite a bit of bad press over the last decade because of the introduction of such drugs as fen-phen and redox. And fen-phen is one of those drugs that's actually a combination of the two drugs, phentermine and fenfluramine. And this was most commonly prescribed medication in the 1990s. And dexfenfluramine or redox is the name. This was developed as an alternative to fenfluramine as it had fewer side effects, but both drugs got removed from the market back in September of 1997, when there was growing evidence suggesting that both of them could cause heart valve degeneration in about 30% of the users. So this was quite serious. So more evidence to suggest that messing with your metabolism through the use of these drugs is really not the best way, and you'll have a much better and more controlled and more long-term sustainable way if someone works on changing their lifestyle and their daily habits gradually, one at a time. So there's a support question here that asks you to think about keeping a food log for 3 days and just follow it for yourself and see how closely are you following Canada's food guide in terms of the number of servings in each food group, and do we really need to make adjustments to our diet to provide a healthier mix of our dietary energy sources. So that's a support question. It's nothing that you have to hand in to me. It's just for your own benefit. It's an exercise you do. And then number 2, which is also a support question, is that DNP was a weight loss drug back in the 30s, and it worked by making the mitochondrial membrane more permeable to protons, so that the protons leaked across the membrane more easily. And if you remember from our previous from our previous lesson, you can appreciate why this would be considered a weight loss drug, and why would it work in that way? Because by doing so, it allowed less ATP produced, but as a result of this, there was actually more heat created. Now, think about, in this case, how would this lead to weight loss? And what would be a problem with this type of weight loss drug? What would be the dangers of using this type of drug, and why do we no longer use this type of drug? So by that note, we've covered our section about obesity and weight control, and the metabolic processes that are involved in energy transformations within our body. So now we can go on and talk about bioremediation. We're going to switch tacks and talk about bioremediation. So bioremediation means using living organisms to help to clean up contaminated soil or water in the environment. And there's typically 3 types of this bioremediation, the 3 processes: biostimulation, bioaugmentation, and intrinsic bioremediation. So in biostimulation, nutrients and oxygen are added to those contaminated areas. And these are meant, the addition of these nutrients and oxygen, as the name suggests, is meant to stimulate. Biostimulation is meant to stimulate or encourage the growth and activity of certain natural occurring bacteria that will then break down those contaminants. So that is biostimulation, where you add nutrients, improve the oxygen to help encourage the growth of bacteria, to stimulate their activity of those naturally occurring bacteria that should help decontaminate. Then the second example would be bioaugmentation. And in bioaugmentation, those organisms that can clean up a particular contaminant, those are added to whatever area that needs to be cleaned up. And this tends to work best when the contaminant has been removed from the area and moved to a different site where those conditions for the growth of that organism that will be added to do the cleanup, those conditions can be maximized and optimized. So that works best when, because typically in whatever conditions that exists in the environment might not necessarily be optimal for the working of these bacteria. So it works best if, for example, you can just scoop up that soil and take it and decontaminate it under ideal conditions. Thirdly, we're going to look at intrinsic bioremediation. Now, this type happens naturally in the water and soil. This tends to be seen in petroleum contamination sites, where the bacteria that naturally occur in the water and the soil just naturally start to break down those contaminants. So the reason that these processes work is that different species of bacteria can use those contaminant molecules to release the energy of those molecules to power their biological processes. And when these contaminant molecules are broken down by these bacteria, then energy is released. So scientists are studying all the different bacterial species to determine the ones that are most suitable for specific contaminants. For example, in gold mining operations, cyanide, which is very poisonous. This is used to remove gold from the surrounding rock, but it's very poisonous. So if cyanide then gets into the water and it gets released back into the ecosystem, it can kill all the living things in that area. And some companies are using bacteria that can actually break down that cyanide to treat that water until the cyanide is removed. And then that cleaned up water is then released back into the ecosystem. And those areas that have already been contaminated get exposed to the bacteria as well. And as a result, they get decreased cyanide levels to the point where it's small enough cyanide content that life can actually grow again and thrive. Research is also being done on how to use bacteria to clean up oil spills, both in the land and in water in lakes and oceans. And it is a hope that these bacteria will be able to break down the oil molecules and remove them from the environment. So back in 1989, when that enormous oil tanker of Exxon Valdez ran in the ground, and in 5 hours, it leaked an enormous amount, approximately 258,000 barrels of oil into the waters of the coast of Alaska and contaminated about 300 miles of coastline. And this was a natural disaster, but it also, being a natural disaster, on the positive side, it provided a natural laboratory. It was a place for scientists to use to study how these various bacteria species were able to help clean up the contamination of a region. So in a way, this was a huge disaster, but I guess some good ultimately was able to be gained from this. So we talked about these processes that use bacteria to help clean up contaminants. Now we can talk about phytoremediation. And phyto, whenever you're talking about phyto, you're talking about something that's related to plants. Phytoremediation is that kind of bioremediation that instead of bacteria uses plants. So here, plants are used, and the natural ability of various plants are used to help clean up the contaminant from the environment. So plants are used to contain, to take up the contaminant or toxin. They can sometimes degrade those contaminants and draw and remove them from the water and from the soil, just because that's typically what plants do. So scientists have started looking at these types of plants, sunflower being one of them, ragweed, cabbage, and geraniums to help to clean up these contaminated sites. We can talk about some advantages and disadvantages to using this type of remediation, phytoremediation. And plants are, on the plus side, very environmentally friendly, and they're actually quite cost effective too. It doesn't take much to get plants. They have the ability to clean up a large amount of contaminants, mostly. And in many cases, the metals that they absorb can actually be removed from that plant matter later on and actually recycled and be isolated again. And because of their root system, go deep into the soil, they are able to prevent or reduce contaminants from entering the groundwater. So they take it up before it can reach deeper groundwater reserves. So those are all pluses of using phytoremediation for using plants to clean up environmental contaminants. But on the negative side, a disadvantage of phytoremediation is that it can take a long time because it relies on the natural growth cycle of a plant. It relies on that growth season. So the contaminants can only be actually removed from the areas that are within the reach of the plant root and on the timeline of the growth of the plant. And so the amount of area that the plant's root system can typically reach is approximately anywhere between 3 to 6 feet for typically the type of plants that we've talked about. Or if you have trees, in some cases, 10 to 15 feet or a little bit deeper. This is how much you can get, how far you can get the roots to go and to be effective for cleaning up contamination. And in addition, there's also that risk of animals can come along and eat these plants that are busy cleaning up and taking up contaminants out of the environment, but then themselves are becoming a storage for contaminants. So these animals can eat these contaminated plants, and the poison, the toxins can move from the plant then into the animal's body and enter the food chain. So that is definitely a disadvantage, is that you don't want to be moving the contaminants into the food chain at that point. So all of these factors are taken into account when phytoremediation is being considered to see whether or not it might be a suitable option for cleanup. But there's typically 5 basic types of phytoremediation, and these are based on whether or not the contaminant is in the form of a metal. Is it a metal contaminant, or is it an organic chemical? So if it is a metal contaminant, the methods that are used is one of them is phytoextraction. And there's also rhizofiltration and phytostabilization. That's for metal contaminants. If there are organic chemicals, then there's 2 other types of remediation that can be used. One of them is called phytotransformation, which we will talk about. And the 5th one is rhizosphere bioremediation. So let's talk about these a little bit more in detail. So these 5 basic types of phytoremediation. So for metals, for metal extraction, phytoextraction is the method where plants actually physically absorb the metal from into their root system and move it into their upper parts of the plant, in the stems and the leaves and up into the flower heads, higher up into the plant. And then by doing so, then the harvested plants are sort of enriched in the metal that they've absorbed and taken up, and they can be harvested, and then you can take them and discard them properly, extract the metal, or recycle it, whatever. So that is phytoextraction. So here we have a little diagram showing the basic idea of the phytoextraction is that you have the soil, And there's this, the contaminant in the soil is shown with these little particles of C for contaminant is all throughout the soil. But as you can see in this scenario, the roots are taking up the contaminant, and the contaminant is traveling up through the rest of the plant into the stems, into the leaves. That contaminant is being taken up by the plant tissue and mobilized and moved into the shoots and the stems and the leaves. But as you can see, there's only a limited area where the roots are able to access. So this lighter color shade of soil here shown is the soil that is being remediated and that has actually gotten cleaned up. But the rest of the soil where the roots of the plant cannot access the contaminant, those will still be contaminated. So this would be one of the limitations and disadvantages of phytoextraction, is that you can only clean up so far as the roots can reach. The second method we can talk about is rhizofiltration. In rhizofiltration, plants that use this type of method can either absorb that contaminant directly into the roots, or it gets attracted to and held by the roots. And this only works for surface and groundwater remediation. Plants are grown in clean water, are replanted in those contaminated areas, and when the roots get saturated with the contaminant, then they get removed and replaced. So rhizofiltration, if you want to compare and contrast it to that other method of phytoextraction, here it's mostly the roots that are taking up or attracting and holding on to that metal contaminant. In this method, it's not so much the rest of the plants, but it's mostly the root system, hence the word rhizo. Rhizo means root. So this type of process has been used in some artificially created wetlands to treat wastewater and contaminated water that may be coming from landfill sites, water runoff from landfill sites. The third method that we can talk about is phytostabilization. So in this method, rather than absorbing the contaminant, these plants are used to contain or at least slow down the movement of that contaminant. And this can help to prevent the contamination of groundwater. So in phytostabilization, that is shown in this figure here. So this tree that's planted actually reduces surface erosion, so it stops from water from getting running off into different areas. But also you have the contaminant is absorbed onto the roots, and it holds on to it's immobilized in the soil through the use of these enzymes that might be being produced by the roots or on the roots. And the root system will exude various enzymes, alcohols, phenols, or carbohydrates, or acidic substances that will combine with the contaminant in the soil and just immobilize it and contain it within a certain area, so that that area of the soil would be the soil that is becoming remediated. So that was if there are, the contaminant is metal. These worked mostly for metal types of contaminants. So organic chemicals have slightly different chemical character. So for these, there is phytotransformation or rhizosphere bioremediation. So in phytotransformation, in this process, the plants can actually absorb that chemical and actually break it down. So not just take it up and hold on to it in their stems and leaves, but actually take it up and break it down, chemically transform it to less harmful components by metabolizing it. This would be phytotransformation. So as you can imagine, you can use the title to help you remember what this process is about. Phyto is for the plant, and then transformation. So that contaminant, that organic chemical is being transformed, metabolically transformed into less harmful chemicals by the plant. So phytotransformation. Now, the fifth and the last type, rhizosphere bioremediation. Here, it's not the plants themselves that break down the contaminant, but rather these plants provide the natural substances that the microorganisms that would live amongst these plants, amongst the root systems or on the leaves or whatever, microorganisms such as yeast, such as fungus, such as bacteria, they provide those natural substances that these yeast, fungi, and bacteria need in order to grow. And it's then these microorganisms that break down the contaminants. So the plants typically through their rhizo system, so through their root system, rhizosphere. So this is mostly actually most effective down in the roots level, provide the conditions that allow these organisms' growth to become stimulated. And it's these organisms' metabolic processes that allow for the uptake and the breakdown of these organic chemicals into less harmful components and break it down the material that are contaminated in the soil or in the environment. And certainly there's been quite a lot of research into different plant species that can be used. And it's hoped that eventually there will be a seed bank of plants that can be made available and used for various contaminants, and that these will be very well established so that if in the future, if there is a site that's found to be contaminated, you can just go to the seed bank catalog and pull out the plant species that will be able to help solve that problem and decontaminate or whatever is that contaminant in that area. So using plants is to clean a site is definitely a much more environmentally friendly way of doing things rather than a complete removal of the contaminated material. And it's also a good way of making use of our natural resources that are available to us. So that was a fairly short lesson today. It covered some ideas that I think on a broader scale, I think we're mostly familiar with. But certainly we can look at these in greater detail. And the key questions at the end of this section are meant to get you to go and to research these ideas that we've talked about here today in broad strokes and look at them a little bit more closely. So in key question number 8, and these are all due together with key question number 7 from our last lesson, they're due by Sunday, please. So the first question says, talks about the South Beach diet. So it asks you to go research this diet and answer these questions to describe how this diet is similar to the basic low carb diet, how is it different from the basic low carb diet? And then based on what you understand, is this diet a safe way of losing weight? Is South Beach diet a safe diet? So in question number 2, it says that one of the new weight loss miracle drugs is called Hoodia Gordoni. You were asked to research this substance and answer some of the questions. Where is it found? How does it work to control weight? What are the potential side effects from them? And what are the potential problems about obtaining this substance? Then question number 3 is about arsenic. Arsenic is an element that causes death in humans and animals, and it has been released into the environment because of a number of industrial processes use arsenic, and oftentimes they contaminate the environment. Now, it has been discovered that a plant called the Chinese brake fern grows well in contaminated soil contaminated with arsenic, and will take up the arsenic through the process of phytoextraction that we talked about. So do a little bit of research on this plant, Chinese brake fern, and talk about it in just a very short report about how it mediates contaminated soil and water. And as always, whenever you're researching something, please include your references, even though it's not spelled out here. Let me just put that in. And that's for 10 marks. And then finally, number 4, using the information that here's below and the research that you did in question number 3 about that Chinese brake fern, answer these following questions. Typical arsenic concentrations in contaminated soil is 100 parts per million, or 100 milligrams of arsenic per kilogram of soil. 100 milligrams per kilogram is the same as saying 100 parts per million. So if you have one brake fern that can extract 38 milligrams of arsenic from the soil in 20 weeks' time, answer these questions. How many harvests and how long would it take to phytoremediate the soil, assuming that the fern grows all year round? It doesn't have a limited growth season, but it can grow all year round. And also B, is it realistic to assume that the fern will always be able to remove 38 milligrams of arsenic in 20 weeks? And talk about this. Is this reasonable? Yes, no, why? And in C, what are some of the limitations that may affect this plant's ability to phytoextract the arsenic? So based on some of the stuff that we talked about, what would be some things that might limit this plant's ability to do what it's supposed to do, to phytoextract? Okay, so that is all that we have here in this lesson. Does anybody have any questions? Aryan, Hania, Shahryar, anybody have any questions? Okay, so in that case, I hope I haven't put everybody to sleep here tonight by talking.
Actually, Miss, I have one question.
Yeah, go for it.
It's about our marks. Is there a way for us to see them, or do you email them back to us?
Oh, as I mark your assignments, I will put them here. Let me show you. So it will be all shared with you in your Google Drive. So let me just open up. And show you, for example. Okay, so I'll just show you this tab where I have, so in your Google Drive, I've shared all these lessons, and I'm sharing more as I'm making them available. There's your textbook, there's your biology book, there's your welcome, but I also have all of these folders for each of you, and I will share each of these folders with you. As I mark your assignments, I will return the marked assignments in each one of your folders. So in your shared with me folder, you should, once I mark them and return them to you, I'm sorry, I haven't marked because not everybody has been handing them in. So that's been sort of delaying the whole process for everybody. But as I mark them and send them back to you, you'll find them in your shared with me folder for each student that I have. So you can look in your shared with me folder. There's nothing in there right now. I apologize, but I will get on that as more assignments come in. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, no problem. Okay, if nobody has any other questions, I think we can conclude tonight's lesson. Okay, so I'll see you all again on next week, Monday, same time, and we'll continue. We'll start unit 3. And unit 3, I will share the lessons with you ahead of time so that you can start looking at it, and if you'd like to brush up on it or look at it. So that is unit 3 is on molecular genetics, and we're going to be starting an introduction to genetics, just reviewing heredity, and talking about DNA structure and some of the experiments that have led to our understanding of DNA being involved in providing us with the code for the making and the functioning of all the processes in our body. So yeah, it's going to be, it's definitely a very important unit and very interesting information. Okay, so I'll see you all. Next week, beginning of a new unit. All right, take care.
Good night, Miss.
Good night.